It's indeed a privilege to be here, and I'm extremely grateful to you and to the National Institute of Technical Teachers Training and Research, Chandigarh, for this opportunity to deliver a lecture as part of the Heritage Management Status Challenges and Entrepreneurial Approach Faculty Development Program of AICTE. So the title of my presentation today is Integration of Heritage Resources for Sustainable Development Goals. And it is in keeping with the Sustainable Development Goal 4, which relates to quality education, that we find ourselves looking into this aspect. So the Sustainable Development Goals are extremely important as far as the development of our country within the global scenario is concerned. I'd like to begin by just going over a little bit of the context, which will further reinforce the idea that culture and heritage are key to sustainable development, especially in our scenario. The lectures of the preceding 3 days would also have developed upon this theme, that with increased accessibility due to growing technological and infrastructure development, that the heritage resources of our country are becoming uh, more vulnerable. There is a lot of transformation of local areas which is taking place due to inappropriate development. There are impacts which are due to global aspects such as climate change. There are requirements of basic amenities and facilities to be provided both for people who are residing in the heritage areas as well as for visitors who are interested in cultural tourism. There are issues related to retention and reinforcement of cultural identity. There is a necessity for multi-stakeholder collaborations, and it is extremely important for us to understand that heritage is an asset and a resource, and that for community-centered uh, development which is sustainable, it is necessary to have an entrepreneurial approach and to develop business models for that purpose. So when we look into the Sustainable Development Goals, what are they? The Sustainable Development Goals were adopted in September 2015 under the UN resolution, which was called Transforming Our World, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. India was one of the signatories to this resolution, and it has a commitment to achieve the 17 SDGs and 169 associated targets. These SDGs comprehensively cover the socio-cultural, economic, and environmental dimensions of development, and the focus is on ending poverty in all its forms and dimensions. One of the resources that uh, is there in our country, which very few other countries have, is that of the heritage resources. The heritage resources are a major asset of our country, and they can help in ensuring that the sustainable development goals can be achieved by our country by 2030. In addition to the sustainable development goals, the UNESCO has also undertaken and adopted in 2015 the new urban agenda. This was for integrating culture for sustainable urban development, and this new urban agenda pays particular attention to the needs of the poor in strategies for regeneration. It would be worthwhile for us, while looking at this photograph of one of the most magical, significant heritage sites in our country, that of Mandu, it, which exemplifies in its character, in its heritage elements, the various kind of cross-cultural influences which have resulted in our heritage resources, which are of such great richness and diversity, which is perhaps unparalleled in the world, and the kind of challenges which are before us as a country, which is on the way towards development. So, what are the Sustainable Development Goals, and how are heritage and creativity of our communities linked with the Sustainable Development Goals? The first goal is that related to no poverty. The second is related to zero hunger. Third is related to good health and well being. The fourth is related to quality education. The fifth to gender equality. Sixth to clean water and sanitation. The seventh to affordable and clean energy. The eighth to decent work and economic growth. The ninth for industry, innovation and infrastructure. The tenth to reduction of inequality. The 11th, which is the most significant and directly linked with the heritage resource conservation, is sustainable cities and communities. The 12th Sustainable Development Goal is related to sustainable consumption and production. The 13th to climate action impacts. The 14th to life below water. The 15th to life on land. The 16th on peace, justice, and strong institutions. And the 17th, which is linked with partnership for achieving the sustainable development goals. All of these sustainable development goals are linked with heritage resource management. The although the sustainable development goals were specifically adopted from 2015 onwards, from 2003 the World Bank, in its framework for cultural heritage and development, and in relation to all its multilateral funding activities, has recognized that all development interventions involve cultural and social dimensions. So, therefore, heritage, the cultural and social dimensions have to be taken into account into all kinds of developmental activities. The effort has to be to make culture part of the purposive inducement of development. This will help to increase the cultural sustainability of development as well as its economic effectiveness. So, the World Bank for almost 20 years has recognized that all development interventions can only be sustainable culturally and economically if the social dimensions and the heritage resources are taken into account. So, in this presentation, today's session, we are going to be talking about the integration of heritage resources. We'll be discussing what exactly is meant when we talk about heritage as a resource for development. We'll briefly look into what constitutes heritage significance and potential. We will look into detail as to how the sustainable development goals are linked with heritage as a resource, what are the principles of sustainability which have traditionally been embedded in the heritage resources of our country, what is the implication and impact of the kind of development scenario today, and what is the necessity for adopting an integrated approach for heritage management which ensures that heritage is taken into consideration while planning for development. The kind of processes which are there in relation to assessing the impact on heritage of developmental projects, the economics of heritage, and the kind of revenue generation and uh, job creation potential which is there as far as heritage resources are concerned. and also the necessity for scientific research, development of technology, and innovation for integrated heritage resource management. So, the recognition of heritage as a resource has been there in our country for a very long period of time. Unfortunately, many of the government programs have not taken into account the developmental potential of heritage. Sometimes heritage has been relegated to the margins, and it is only over the last 40 years, as the integrated planning approach to development has evolved, that heritage resources have been considered together with all the other resources which are taken into account for developmental purposes. So here we can see that when we talk about heritage, it is very difficult to distinguish between the natural and the cultural, the tangible and the intangible. There is a very high degree of interdependence which is there between the natural resource base and the kind of cultural resources which have evolved over millennia in most parts of our country. So you would already be familiar with these concepts, but we are just going to go over these again in the context of understanding how these heritage resources are to be used for achievement of the sustainable development goals. So we begin with defining as to what constitutes heritage. Heritage is considered to be the full range of our inherited traditions, monuments, objects, and culture. The, this has a basis and a potential for sustainable development, and therefore it can be considered as a resource. Heritage includes ideas, memories, reflections which contribute to our identity and which are important facets of a multicultural world. And the resources include a range of contemporary activities, meanings, behaviors, processes that we draw from our memories of heritage. Heritage can be both tangible and intangible, and it, as a resource, it is an element of far-sighted urban and regional developmental activities. As you can see from the image here of the Chamba festival ground, the space of the festival ground, the kind of rituals which are being practiced there, the landscape within which this entire activity and process is taking place. It is a mix of both tangible and intangible. So, as we can see, heritage is actually a very complex concept, but it is a concept that over a period of time has had specific, very clearly defined technical, legal, and official meanings. As far as the Oxford English Dictionary is concerned, heritage includes concepts related to inheritance. It includes concepts related to transmission of values. It includes uh, concepts related to conservation. So the definition or range of definitions related to heritage are: heritage is property that is or may be inherited. So everything that has been handed down to us from our ancestors can be considered as heritage. Heritage is an inheritance which has been given to us by our predecessors. Heritage can be defined as valued things such as historic buildings that have been passed down from previous generations. So this definition takes into account tangible heritage resources such as historic buildings. Another definition is that heritage relates to things of historic or cultural value that are worthy of preservation. So, when we look at the range of heritage sites which are there in our country, many of which have been designated as World Heritage, these which are of significance, historic and cultural significance, not only at the local level, but which are considered to be significant at the global level, all of these definitions hold good. So, tangible heritage resources, as you would already be aware, encompass cultural heritage sites such as archaeological sites, ruins, complexes, and buildings. Tangible heritage resources can range in scale to very large historic cities or historic centers. They can include historic urban landscapes. They can include all the historic systems which comprise the historic cities, such as the water management systems or the open space systems, which were there traditionally in historic cities, and which also can include ruins of cities. For example, Hampi, a a very significant historic center. Then the tangible heritage resources, which have a very significant component of the intangible associated with them, are the cultural landscapes category. This category includes parks, gardens. It also includes pasture lands, farms, agrarian landscapes. Tangible heritage resources can include natural sacred sites such as sacred mountains, sacred rivers, sacred groves. Then there is the underwater cultural heritage, cities which have been lost to the sea, for example, Pumpuhar, etc., Dwarka. Then there are museums and movable cultural heritage. So this is a classification which and categorization which is linked with the technical and legal definition of heritage. So heritage encompasses tangible heritage resources such as objects and places. It also encompasses practices with significance. So heritage has significance, and there are values which have been attributed to this heritage. When we come to the intangible, there are practices of heritage, the traditional knowledge and skills, which can be considered as the intangible heritage, or which can be classified as intangible heritage. There are intangible practices, traditions, rituals, processions, skills which take place or which occur in particular tangible contexts, such as within historic city centers or within certain kinds of cultural landscapes. Other intangible practices relate to the creation of handicrafts, towards building crafts also. There are other intangible practices which include oral traditions, which relate to different kinds of languages, the literature which is linked with those languages. Intangible heritage also includes festivals, the culinary traditions of different places. It includes rituals, traditions, and religious beliefs, such as those which are shown here, related to Vastu, the cosmological kind of dimension of the physical environment. And the practices of heritage also include performing arts, dance, music, and sports. So this is an aspect of heritage which has a continuity and a relevance to communities today. So it imparts a sense of continuity to what was there in the past. Heritage also includes the natural heritage of landscapes and ecological systems. This comprises features such as plants, animals, natural landscapes and landforms, water bodies. These kind of landscapes and ecological systems are valued for their aesthetic qualities, for the geological, biological, and ecological processes which are manifested there. And the landscapes and ecological systems are also significant because of the provision of natural habitats for the conservation of biodiversity. All of these are very closely linked with the different sustainable development goals. So, one of the most important aspects to be taken into account while considering heritage as a resource for achievement of the sustainable development goals is the kind of interdependence between the cultural and natural resources which is there in our country. So here we can see the link between nature and culture in a very tangible form, which is linked with certain rituals, with certain processional aspects, and which inspires art forms such as the paintings, which you can see, which are a very important aspect of traditional knowledge systems. So, heritage has great significance and potential for achievement of the sustainable development goals. There are sets of meanings, values, principles which are related to the past, in the present, and there for the future within the heritage. There are values which are implicit in heritage management. These are values which, while working towards achievement of the sustainable development goals, we have to be safeguarding these values, sustaining these values, and enriching these values as part of the development process. That is what will ensure that the sustainable development actually takes place. So, when we look at broader concepts of sustainable development and integrated heritage management, there is an emphasis on the environmental, social, cultural, and economic aspects. It is not as if development is only considered as economic development, but the aspects of socio-cultural and environmental uh, development is also taken into account. And over the years, there have been many global experiences which demonstrate that heritage resource management, which is integrated into development, enhances the economic, environmental, social, and cultural sustainability of whatever intervention or process is proposed. It is seen that heritage resources contribute towards the well-being and quality of life of communities. So whether they are traditional communities, communities of migrants, there is always a reliance on the heritage resources. These heritage resources provide a sense of identity and community. They provide an anchor to communities who are faced with very rapid transformation, with all kinds of developmental pressures. And these heritage resources help to mitigate the impacts of globalization, or they help to guide the impacts of globalization in a way that is beneficial and which enriches the community. So, heritage resources can become an incentive for sustainable economic development, and there are various economic, social, cultural, and environmental benefits that can be generated by appropriate use of the heritage resources and integrated heritage management within the developmental process. So, Here you can see the World Heritage Site of Bodh Gaya, the temple at Bodh Gaya, which is of global significance and which helps to uh, provide a developmental stimulus for a certain part of the country. And on the right side, you can see the kind of living traditions which are associated with the Jain monastic establishment in Shravanbelagola. So these are heritage resources, tangible, intangible, rituals, practices, natural resources, which contribute towards the well-being and quality of life of the communities, and which uh, are integrated within the uh, developmental process. So when we look at heritage significance and potential, it's extremely important to define what is the kind of sense of place, the sense of identity, the sense of evolution, the sense of ownership, and the sense of community that our heritage resources provide. And what is the kind of uh, contribution that they can make towards sustainable development. So on the left, you can see the Rampur Sarahan complex, which testifies to a particular micro, to a particular climatic response, to evolution within a particular geobiographical context, and which provides a sense of identity and a sense of place, a sense of ownership, and a sense of community, which is very different from the site on the right. However, in both cases, these heritage resources can be managed in such a way that they are able to contribute towards the achievement of sustainable development goals if integrated properly into the development process. So when we talk about the various programs and the various schemes which are there, which are intended to ensure that our commitment as a country is fulfilled by 2030, it's necessary also to recognize that there are certain principles of sustainability which are embedded in our heritage resources and which have helped to sustain and ensure the development of communities over more than thousands of years in some cases. When we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, there are aspects such as human-centered cities, inclusive cities, human scale and compact cities, sustainable, resilient and green cities, which uh, are aspects which have traditionally characterized our historic cities. Uh, the Global Report on Culture for Sustainable Urban Development has identified three different aspects which have to be taken into account in order to ensure that heritage is integrated within the sustainable development goals. The development goal 11 related to sustainable cities and communities has a target number 4, which is related to strengthening of efforts to protect and safeguarding the world's cultural and natural heritage. So when we discuss sustainable development goals, goal number 11, which is related to sustainable cities and communities, target 4 related to protection and safeguarding the world's cultural and natural heritage, is the most prominent goal which is linked with heritage resource management. However, as we will go on to see, each one of the development goals are linked with heritage resources, and heritage resource management would contribute towards sustainable achievement of these sustainable development goals. So the Global Report on Culture for Sustainable Urban Development identified three aspects related to people, related to environment, and related to policies. The first was in relation to people, that the cities have to be human centered. The cities have to be inclusive, societies have to be peaceful and tolerant, and cities should be creative and innovative. So this is linked with the management of heritage resources, and if the heritage resources of various places are properly managed, the livability of cities will be enhanced and the identities of these cities will be safeguarded. Uh, Through culture, through heritage, it is possible to ensure social inclusion in cities. Through culture, it is possible to promote creativity and innovation in urban development, which is linked with the heritage of the past, and it is possible to carry out peace building initiatives and engage in dialogues if we rely and build upon the existing cultural resources. In relation to the environment, the global report identifies that human scale and compact cities uh, are required, that green cities which are sustainable and resilient are required. The environment of these cities has to have inclusive public spaces, and urban identities have to be safeguarded. So, the global report emphasizes that there are lessons which can be learned from urban conservation practices, and that through these lessons, by drawing upon these lessons from urban conservation practices, we can identify principles of sustainability, and we can foster human scale and mixed use cities which are more sustainable. It will be possible to promote livable built and natural environments if we integrate the heritage resource management. It will be possible to enhance the quality of public spaces through uh, cultural resource management, and it will be possible to improve resilience in the urban context through culture-based solutions. The global report identifies policies for sustainable local development, for enhanced rural-urban linkages, for improved urban governance, and for financing sustainable urban development through regeneration and development of innovative and sustainable financial models for cultural resources. So the report says that it is possible to regenerate cities and rural urban linkages by integrating culture at the core of urban planning. So this is a statement made in 2015 by UNESCO that the links between cultural heritage resource conservation and management and sustainable development have to be uh, understood. And it is necessary to build on culture as a sustainable resource for inclusive economic and social development. It is necessary to promote participatory processes through culture and to enhance the role of communities in local governance. So, the Global Report on Culture for Sustainable Urban Development identifies that in India there are certain initiatives which have been taken. There are a lot of uh, possibilities in South Asia and in India in relation to how heritage can support and ensure sustainable development. So the report states that in recent years there have been several innovative programs in India which reflect a paradigm shift as far as the approach to historic areas is concerned. Earlier, historic areas used to be designated as slums. They used to be in master plans. Lines used to be drawn indicating over densified areas as historic cores, and the planning focus was usually on the areas which surrounded the historic core. So recently there has been a shift in approach which tries to address the potential and the possibilities related to these historic areas as a resource and not as a burden. So in India, there is the Hriday scheme, which has been identified by UNESCO, which is the Heritage City Development and Augmentation Yojana, which had been launched by the government in 2014 in partnership with state governments to foster the holistic development of heritage cities while enhancing each city's specific identity. So this was identified as a program which uh, tried to ensure that the heritage resources were taken into consideration as far as sustainable development planning for certain historic cities was concerned. So, this report also brought out that the authenticity and integrity of South Asia and India's urban heritage is threatened by rapid urbanization, that there are problems with inadequate planning, and there are standardized urban renewal projects which may have a detrimental impact. It also identifies that the region has a vulnerability to natural disasters. There are risk mitigation policies and preventive management mechanisms which are insufficient. There are urban conservation and regional processes which for which policies have recently been prepared. There is a focus on public space, but instead of being integral to all urban discussions and agendas, heritage resources have remained marginal. This global report also identified that conservation is not integrated within the development agenda. It is perceived as being low priority. However, urban regeneration, which looks into the needs of the poor and which requires particular attention, has a lot of potential through innovative use of pro-poor policy frameworks. As we will go on to see, there are certain pro-poor projects which are being undertaken in the country, which have a very serious integration of heritage resources as a resource for development. The global report also identified that there are issues related to the necessity for increasing community participation, and they also identified that there are culture-based urban strategies which offer opportunities for broader, more equitable, and more effective community participation. They also identified that there are many pitfalls as far as tourism strategies are concerned, and that it is necessary to ensure that heritage resources are properly integrated into the developmental process. So now we will start to see what are the ways in which the economic benefits can be generated through heritage management and what are the sustainable development goals that they are linked with. The first goal, which is related to no poverty, and the eighth sustainable development goal related to decent work and economic growth, are very directly linked with heritage conservation. There are very large number of craftspeople in the country who are custodians of who are custodians of traditional knowledge systems, who have uh, a very vast range of knowledge which needs to be integrated into the developmental process. So, heritage conservation can provide sustainable livelihoods to craftspeople who are custodians of this kind of knowledge and who have these kind of traditional skills. It can help to provide respectable, decent work for a vast range of craftspeople all across the country, which will help to involve them in the creative economy and which will result in more broad-based grassroots level economic growth, which will have a direct implication in different parts of the country. Uh, The economic benefits which are generated by integrated heritage management will also help to ensure that poverty is reduced in the country. So on the left side, you can see the kind of skills which the craftsmen possess and which are necessary for all conservation projects which are undertaken. So on the left you can see in Agra, on the right in Dehradun. These are skills which are still in demand and which can also be utilized for contemporary developmental purposes, not just for conservation, thereby ensuring that there is continuity and benefits accruing to communities who are on the margins at the present. So, when we look at the kind of skills which are possessed by craftsmen, there are a lot of economic benefits which can be generated through developing capacity, through innovating in such a way that the craftsmen are able to benefit not just through conservation but through contributing towards contemporary building also. This kind of approach has been demonstrated in a project which was undertaken from 2007 onwards, a sustained effort and initiative for integration of heritage resources for developmental purposes by the Aga Khan Trust for Culture in the area which is known as Hazrat Nizamuddin and the Humayun's tomb. So this was a developmental initiative which tried to link the monumental resources, the nationally protected monumental complex of the Humayun's tomb, which is also a World Heritage Site, with the surrounding uh, open space systems as well as the living community which inhabited the urban village known as Hazrat Nizamuddin. So they tried to ensure that the economic, environmental, and social benefits of using heritage as a resource for development were achieved. And here we can see on the left side the Humayun's tomb complex, and on the right the Humayun's tomb complex within a much larger area which has been revalorized through this initiative. Pro-poor integrated approaches for heritage management were utilized, and there was generation of sustainable livelihoods based on revival of crafts. There were crafts such as preparation of glazed tiles which were revived, and capacity was built, and the skills of traditional stone carvers was improved through this particular projects. So this was one of the earlier initiatives which resulted in very direct economic, environmental, and social benefits, which are linked with the sustainable goal number 11.4. There are economic, environmental, and social benefits which can be achieved through integration of the heritage resources. This is linked with Sustainable Development Goal 11 as well as Sustainable Development Goal 9 related to industry, innovation, and infrastructure. If we look at the situation of many of our historic cities, which were of great significance during the medieval period, perhaps some of the most significant cities of the world, three most significant cities of the world in the 6th, 17th century, uh, there has been a lot of decline and deterioration, which is evident in our historic centers. And this has accelerated over the past 20, 30 years post liberalization. We can see the kind of loss which has taken place from the 1917 list to the 2016 list of heritage resources. There has been a great deal of heritage resources which have been lost. So, in order to ensure regeneration of historic urban areas, Sustainable Development Goals, which refer to the need of financing models for urban regeneration, such as Sustainable Development Goal 11 related to sustainable cities and communities, come into uh, play. So we have Sustainable Goal 9, which relates to industry, innovation, and infrastructure, which uh, ensures that these historic urban areas are provided with improved urban infrastructure, that innovative methods are there to ensure financing and support for these kind of regeneration and heritage management activities. As far as traditional uh, settlement planning is concerned, our country has a lot of traditional settlement morphologies which have sustainability principles which are embedded in the settlement planning. In relation to the intangible knowledge related to siting of settlements, related to the kind of principles of well being which are there in the Vastu Shastras, there are a lot of lessons which can be learned, which can help to guide current sustainable development planning at the regional level and at the national level. So, this links up with the Sustainable Development Goals 11 and the target 11A, 11B, and 11C. The Sustainable Development Goal 11 related to sustainable cities and communities mentions that it is necessary to have strong national and regional development planning. So, the sustainability principles which are embedded in our traditional settlements can help to contribute towards that strong regional development planning in terms of identifying locations, in terms of identifying traditional patterns of development which are sustainable over centuries and sometimes millennia. Then these sustainability principles can also help in target 11B, which is related to policies for inclusion, resource efficiency, and disaster risk reduction. It is an interesting fact that traditional communities recognized which are the areas which are suitable for building and which are the areas which are suitable for development of other types other than construction. So they identified areas which were floodplains, which were suitable for cultivation or for pasture lands, areas which were prone to erosion, which were suitable for plantation, areas which were elevated and stable, which were suitable for construction. So it is through the study of these kind of traditional settlement morphologies and the traditional knowledge which is embodied in those settlement morphologies that our heritage resources can help in implementation of policies relating to resource efficiency and disaster risk reduction. Another way in which uh, heritage resources can be integrated into Sustainable Development Goal 11 target C is that these sustainability principles can help to identify what are the sustainable and resilient building practices which have proven to be resource efficient and energy efficient over a long period of time. So, there are traditional settlement morphologies. There are innumerable examples of traditional climate responsive development, from which lessons can be drawn and the principles of sustainability in different biogeographical contexts clearly understood. This uh, this process of understanding the principles of sustainability, identifying the traditional knowledge systems, also links up with Sustainable Development Goal 7, which is related to affordable and clean energy. When we study the planning morphology or the layout of traditional settlements such as Leh and its historic urban expansion of the 19th century, we are able to identify certain principles relating to the built form, to the neighborhood planning, to accessibility, to the open space systems, and to the various typologies of heritage components that provide uh, lessons on what is suitable for that particular climate. What are the kind of lessons in relation to climate responsive development that we can understand from a study of the traditional planning principles? What are the principles of sustainability which can be derived from a study of these patterns? So it is only through detailed study that we are able to understand how orientation, how compactness, how location along the contours or alignment in a particular way will help to ensure greater energy efficiency and which will help to ensure that passive solar uh, gain is available. There are other aspects related to sustainability principles as well as economic, environmental, and social benefits, uh, which we can understand in relation to climate action and in relation to sustainable cities and communities. It is through the study of these principles of sustainability that we are able to identify what are the sustainable building patterns, what are the sustainable ways in which expansion and development can take place in such a way that we are not subjected to all kinds of environmental degradation and economic loss because of damage caused by different kinds of disasters. So the areas in certain biogeographical zones have evolved over a period of time in a very sustainable way. And there are lessons of sustainability, lessons related to resilient building practices, which can be integrated into current day uh, proposals, planning proposals. Now, there are, in addition to Sustainable Development Goal 11, which is related to cities and communities, Sustainable Development Goal number 15, which relates to life on land, is also extremely important in the context of our heritage resources. So, Sustainable Development Goal 15, Life on Land, talks about protection, restoration, and promotion of sustainable use of our terrestrial ecosystems, the necessity to reverse land degradation, and the necessity to ensure harmonious development in relation to the natural resource base. So, under Sustainable Development Goal 15, Life on Land, it is possible to protect and safeguard cultural and natural heritage, also within Goal 11.4 related to sustainable cities and communities. So, when we look at the kind of uh, balance which is there in relation to some of our historic sites and to some of the intangible uh, attitudes and perspectives which link cultural and natural heritage. These, these provide ways in which it is possible to integrate our heritage resource management with the sustainable development goals. One very direct way of doing this is in relation to the revitalization of the water systems. It is through the very careful management of the water resources of an area, the development of extremely sophisticated uh, water systems, understanding the hydrology and geology of a place, that historic settlements have sustained themselves. So there are lessons which can be learned uh, from these historic sites. On the left, we can see the World Heritage Site of Sanchi, where in an extremely arid area, it was possible to collect, store, and distribute water in a way that the monastic communities were sustained. Some of those tanks and reservoirs which make use of the gravity system are still evident there. And on the right, we can see the kind of water structures which were constructed all across the country, which were part of the historic cities, which distinguish the cultural landscapes in different parts of the country, and which still have a lot of potential for regeneration and revitalization. These kind of heritage resources are directly linked with Sustainable Development Goal number 6, which relates to clean water and sanitation. It is seen through many of these exercises. Dr. Vinayak had mentioned the GNNURM uh, proposals planning which was done, and the CDPs which were prepared for the NDMC area. Interestingly, the revitalization of the historic water systems was an important component of the heritage sector for the CDP for the NDMC area. So this is an aspect which is very directly linked, where the heritage resources are very directly linked with the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. There are innumerable historic sites which demonstrate a very sort of evolved and sophisticated relationship with the hydrology and the natural resource base. On the left, you can see the kind of elaborate water systems which were created in the Mandu citadel area in order to modulate the microclimate and also to create an environment which was unrivaled anywhere in the world. And on the right side, you can see in the Bharatpur area, which is a transition area between the Braj cultural region and the Rajasthan cultural region, where there is a very, very innovative use of uh, water systems, which sustains not just the fort but the entire city, and also sustains a very elaborate and sophisticated garden complex. So these are heritage resources which, if integrated into the planning framework, can uh, provide a lot of lessons in relation to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. On the left, you can see the pilgrim town of Vai, which is linked with a very significant sacred river, the kind of interface between the uh, city, the built portion of the city, and the riverfront. So there are all kinds of innovations which have taken place over the last 1,000 years, which are part of the planning of our historic cities, which need to be recognized and which need to be integrated into the planning framework of today. So on the right side, you can see the layout of the Kyoladev Ghana bird sanctuary, which is a World Heritage Site, and its relationship as a wetland with the Bharatpur town, which is a fortified town with a moat and a citadel, again with a moat. So it is only through a proper study and understanding of the hydrology of the place that it is possible to understand how these water systems can be revitalized and integrated into the master plan of today. So, under Sustainable Development Goal 11 and specifically 11.4, there are all kinds of initiatives which have taken place and which will help to ensure sustainable cities and communities. So one aspect is related to the revitalization, related to the adaptive reuse and infrastructure upgradation of our historic city centers. These are characterized by historic buildings, a very large number of traditional buildings and traditional housing stock, some of which is dilapidated, but which is of great significance in terms of its historicity, in terms of its community values, in terms of its architecture and the kind of craftsmanship and embellishment which is manifested in these historic buildings. So, as part of the recent initiatives which have been remarked upon by UNESCO also, from June 2015 onwards, the Heritage City Development and Augmentation Yojana, the Hriday scheme, was an extremely important initiative towards achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. It has been wound up, it is not operational anymore, but there are lessons which can be learnt from it, which will help us to proceed further in achieving Sustainable Development Goal 11.4 by 2030. So the focus of this scheme was related to the development of civic infrastructure for parts of historic cities which were of great significance, which were of which were pilgrim destinations, which were centers of uh, cultural tourism. So The Global Report on Culture for Sustainable Urban Development remarks that for sustainable cities and communities, development, conservation, and revitalization of heritage sensitive infrastructure is a must. It is necessary to have service delivery and infrastructure provisioning of historic city core areas. Many of our historic city centers are deficient in these kind of services and infrastructure, and that is something which needs to be provided in order to achieve Sustainable Development Goal 11.4. It is the starting point of any such effort or initiative for development, conservation, and revitalization is the preparation of heritage inventories. These heritage inventories should cover the built, the natural, as well as the intangible resources of a particular place. This process of infrastructure improvement has to be supported with a focus on local capacity building. This is necessary in order to promote inclusive heritage-based activities and economic activities, this which will result in the enhancement of livelihoods and the cultural identities of cities. So they understand that these historic cities have functioned as unique ecosystems which comprise the natural, the built heritage, and the intangible practices which are linked with the place and the buildings. They understand that capacities and skills need to be upgraded and improved, that there needs to be emphasis on inclusive heritage based economic activities, and that it is possible to utilize the heritage resources for enhancing not just the cultural identity or the sense of place of a city, but also to ensure sustainable livelihoods for the community residing within these historic centers. So, this global report on culture also says that it is necessary to ensure that efforts are taken to establish and manage effective public private partnerships. These public private partnerships are extremely important to ensure urban regeneration and to ensure appropriate adaptive reuse of the underutilized heritage resources of a place. So, India has a very large number of World Heritage Sites. On the left, you can see a very significant monumental site of Fatehpur Sikri, which, and on the right, you can see examples of heritage of that particular period from cities such as Jaipur or Bikaner, where there is a very high level of skill and craftsmanship and traditional knowledge systems which are demonstrated in the tangible heritage resource. Sometimes these skills are still safeguarded by communities of craftspeople. In some cases, many of the skills have been lost and need to be revived. So, in order to protect and safeguard the tangible cultural heritage and resources, it may be necessary to revive and revitalize the traditional knowledge systems also. So, in another World Heritage Site, which is that of Hampi, there is a very clear understanding that it is important to safeguard the cultural and the natural heritage together with the with ensuring the economic benefits to the communities who are associated with this place. So when we come to a discussion on protecting and safeguarding the cultural and natural heritage, which is part of achieving sustainable goal number 11 related to sustainable cities and communities, it has to be recognized that many of these medieval cities were actually ahead of their time. The level of infrastructure which characterized these cities in the medieval period during which they were built was a benchmark for the rest of the world. There were all kinds of innovations which were there, which are embedded in the planning and structure of the towns. We can see that in this plan of Bijapur, which dates back to the beginning of the 20th century. It shows the medieval walled town at the beginning of the 20th century, and it identifies the innovative water systems which were there, which sustained a very large population during the medieval period. So these are historic infrastructure which can again be linked with the sustainable development goals and which will help to ensure the supply of clean water and better sanitation. On the left side, you can see one of the traditional reservoirs and which are still functioning and which could be improved and integrated into the uh, infrastructure of the city of today. There are other extremely elaborate and sophisticated water systems which are characteristic of unique monumental sites. These are not just functional resources, but they are also educational and recreational resources. So the revitalization of such heritage resources would help in contributing to a sustainable development goal 4, which is related to quality education, to ensuring better health and well-being also to the communities who reside in the vicinity of such sites, and many of the other sustainable development goals. Uh, Again, it's extremely important to understand that the historic urban landscapes of our historic cities are of great significance and constitute a really invaluable resource for sustainable development. These are a few images of the town of Bharatpur showing the moat as it exists in the current condition and the innumerable resources related to the topography and terrain in relation to the um, hydrological system, in relation to the vegetation, in relation to the open space networks, in relation to the built heritage systems which are there and which, if integrated into the master plan for the town, will help in the achievement of sustainable goal 11, as well as goals which are linked to life below water, sustainable development goal 14, sustainable development goal 15 related to life on land, and promotion and restoration of terrestrial ecosystems. So sustainable goal 11.4, again related to sustainable cities and communities, has also a provision which relates to, sorry, has a provision which relates to enhancing inclusive and sustainable urbanization and capacity for participatory, integrated and sustainable human settlement planning and management. So, in the context of cities such as Bharatpur, which are gradually being which are gradually deteriorating because of the out migration of people, uh, it is important to recognize and identify the heritage resources which can be used for ensuring sustainable development. So, Sustainable Development Goal 11.4 has very important targets which will need to be adhered to. So by 2030, the first target is to ensure access to all for adequate, safe, and affordable housing and basic services and upgradation of slums. In our context, many of our historic city centers have been designated as slums, and the traditional and historic housing, which is extremely affordable, has deteriorated and been abandoned in many cases. So it is important to carry out uh, inventorization of these resources to ensure that they are upgraded and retrofitted in order to ensure the achievement of targets such as 11.1 related to safe and affordable housing and basic services. These kind of historic cities also are very pedestrian friendly. They are generally safe because of the strength of the community networks which are still present within them. So, Sustainable Development Goal 11, Target 2, which is related to access to safe, affordable, accessible, and sustainable transport for all, improves road safety, expanding public transport with special attention to people in vulnerable situations. This is something which uh, our historic cities can provide important lessons in relation to. Then Sustainable Development Goal 11.3, enhance inclusive and sustainable urbanization and capacity for participatory, integrated and sustainable human settlement planning and management. That is also something which is extremely important as far as the integration of our heritage resources is concerned. Then reduce the adverse per capita environmental impact of cities, that is um, SDG 11 target 6, which relates to municipal and waste management. That is also a very important factor in relation to it's a very important factor in relation to the historic city centers, which have often been uh, designated as slums because of the deterioration of the historic infrastructure or the lack of attention which is paid to the maintenance of the historic infrastructure and the uh, lack of planning for retrofitting and improvement of the infrastructure. Then, as far as SDG 11 is concerned, another target relates to universal access to safe, inclusive, and accessible green and public spaces, in particular for women and children, older persons. So, our historic cities centers are usually characterized by very interesting network of open spaces which need to be integrated into the planning framework. The historic city centers also have utilized sustainable and resilient building uh, materials, such as local materials, and often in a way which is extremely skillful, as you can see from the kind of facades which are there in some of our smaller cities. Now, sustainable goal uh, 11 related to sustainable cities and communities is often linked with SDG 8 related to decent work and economic growth, and SDG 9 related to the industry, innovation, and infrastructure. So, when we look at the challenges which are presented uh, in relation to integration of heritage resources for sustainable development in cities such as Agra, we have heritage resources which are of global significance, such as the World Heritage Site of the Taj Mahal, which is managed. But this highlights the challenge. The image on the uh, below next to the SDG 11 shows the situation in relation to the community who inhabits one section of this complex. So there are aspects of the natural and cultural heritage which need to be integrated into the planning framework, and there is a necessity to ensure that the communities residing in in a historic area are part of the public-private partnership which is used for which is to be utilized for the achievement of the sustainable development goals. There are innumerable cities which face similar problems, and it is extremely important that the communities residing in the place contribute to and sort of participate in the co-development of uh, strategies for achieving the sustainable development goals. So there are lots of lessons related to the different historic urban systems which can be learned from a proper study of these heritage resources. There are uh, many studies which have been done in relation to the various economic benefits which can be generated through using the uh, uh, cultural heritage as a resource through proper conservation and management efforts. So the main economic benefits which can be focused upon are job creation, heritage resource conservation and management can help to augment household incomes. It can help to create jobs. It can help to generate training and improvement of skills. Uh, there are economic benefits which are linked with the revitalization of historic centers. There are economic benefits linked with cultural tourism and heritage tourism. There is an increase in property values which is linked with integrated heritage management of historic areas. There are possibilities of incubation of small businesses which are related to the traditional knowledge systems and skills which the inhabitants of a historic area have. There are economic benefits which are linked with compatibility with heritage sensitive interventions, and there are benefits, economic benefits which are linked with diversification of traditional products and substitution of imports by some of these improved traditional products. So industry, innovation and infrastructure, that is SDG 9, is extremely important in the context of integration of heritage resources, and in the case of many of our historic tourist destinations, there is a very important role that industry has to play. There are innumerable instances where there are very large derelict heritage complexes which can be adaptively reused, or they can be repurposed for a range of different contemporary uses, including that as community facilities, as incubation centers, as places linked with achievement of goal SDG 3, linked with good health and well-being, as well as for the creative and tourism industries. So, two of the uh, important SDGs, which are SDG 10, related to reduction of inequalities, and SDG 11, related to sustainable cities and communities, are illustrated in this particular slide, where on the left you can see the kind of contrast which is there between the environmental conditions and the problems with lack of integrated planning for a historic area in the close vicinity of one of the most globally significant monuments in the world. And on the right side, you can see the integration of the heritage resource, which is the design garden, which I had shown you earlier, which is resulting in an improvement in the environmental conditions of the historic center of Deep, as well as reducing inequalities in terms of access to green and open spaces. So it's important to understand the necessity for seeing heritage as a resource which will help to achieve SDG 8 related to decent work and economic growth. Heritage is a generator of revenue, of jobs, of multiple training opportunities. It heritage helps in improving the quality of education, which is part of which is SDG 4, and it's very directly linked with ensuring good health and well-being, SDG 3, providing clean water and sanitation, SDG 6, and SDG 9 related to industry, innovation and infrastructure. So it's extremely important to ensure that constant innovation is taking place, which will result in improvement of the infrastructure and which will result in uh, urban regeneration, thereby helping to achieve Sustainable Development Goal 11. These are some initiatives of the Department of Architectural Conservation at SPA Delhi, which is trying to develop partnerships with the residents of historic cities and trying to ensure that technology is democratized and is used for the benefit of residents, for enabling them to take more informed decisions relating to what is essentially their heritage. So I would end by re-emphasizing that the 17th SDG, which is related to partnership for achieving the 16 development goals, is the most critical, and it's extremely important as far as training efforts are concerned to understand the scientific basis for some of our traditional knowledge systems and um, trying to ensure that there is a link and a partnership between the traditional knowledge systems as well as the scientific investigations which institutions and academics such as us undertake. And it is only through that that we are going to ensure uh, the effectiveness of our heritage management processes and the use of heritage resources for achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. I'll end here. These are some of the references which I would like to bring to your attention, which are extremely useful if you do intend to communicate some of this to your students. These are extremely useful references and all are available in the form of PDFs, open access online. And thank you very much.